Welcome to ONA's fourth webinar. In today's session, we'll be covering form validation. So give me a moment while I share my screen. Great. So today is ONA's fourth webinar series. Just a reminder of ONA's main mission, where need is the greatest, using data to transform lives. That is our mission. So today's webinar will be on XLSForm Validation. We hope that you are as excited as we are. We'll give you a brief introduction to skip logic and form validations. We won't cover that too much. We'll kind of move straight into the examples. So we're going to learn how to use the required column. We'll learn how to use different skip logics, numerics, multiple choice. We'll learn how to use different constraints. And then at the very end, we'll take a kind of a comprehensive form that kind of employs a lot of these different form validations. If you have any questions, we'd ask you to leave them until the end. Alternatively, you can, at the bottom of your screen, I believe you can leave questions. And Evans will be assisting with questions while I am presenting. Great. So skip logic. Skip logic is a way of kind of automating how we respond to a question based on the previous question. We have also form validations, which you are currently seeing here is a form validation. It has a similar functionality in ODK Collect, where a error message will come up. The question you might ask yourself is, why are these important? So when you're filling in paper-based forms, you have to automate the skip logic yourself and ensure that the data you're collecting is reasonable. By collecting it digitally, you have less data cleaning, which results in higher quality data, which also simplifies the data collection process. Overall, it most likely will lead to savings in the long run, all of which are good things. So one of the first very basic form validations is utilizing the required column. This ensures that the person that is filling in the form fills in the question before they either move to the next question or they submit the form without answering the question. The other additional ways of using skip logic is using what we call relevant conditions. It utilizes a relevant column where you enter the condition that applies to that question. You can utilize math logic operators, as you see on the screen to the left. And you can also use logic operators of and or to combine and make more complex expressions, either for skip logic or constraints as well. So an example of a skip logic, the very basic, is kind of numeric. Numerics are what we utilize to show how skip logics work when we are first training people on how to use them. So if we look at the first example here, in the first question, we're collecting a child's age. And in the next question, we're asking the name of the school the child attends. A child doesn't typically start school in most locations until at least the age of 4, maybe 3 if there's kind of a preschool or kind of primary, like pre-primary school they attend. So we wouldn't necessarily want to ask all respondents this question. We would only want to ask them if the child were 4 years or older. So what we did in our relevant condition, our relevant column, which is utilized for the skip logic, is we reference the question utilizing the notation of the $, the name value of the question, and put it between curly brackets, as you see here. So this is referencing the previous question. And what it says here is that this question will only appear when the child's age, which was entered here, is greater than or equal to 4. So this would apply for 5, 4, all the way onwards. And another example would be this question where we're talking about monthly income, number of members, and basically hunger. So in the first question, we ask, what is the monthly income in USD? The second question, we ask how many household members there are. And in the third question, we ask how many of those household members have ever gone hungry a whole day. And we make some assumptions with our relevant condition. We say this would most likely only occur if the number of household members is greater than 4, so 5, 6, 7, and the monthly income is less than $100 USD. So here we're utilizing a numeric skip logic example, and we're combining them using to make a more complex expression using the and. So in order for this question to appear, it requires that both of these conditions be met with the answers to the previous questions. There we go. The next example is using skip logic. Multiple choice. We're looking at select ones right now. We'll look at a select multiple in our next slide. So in this question, we're looking at whether a child has a disability. And if they have a disability, what disability do they have? So the second question will only appear if the answer chosen is yes. So the thing to note here is, again, we're referencing our previous question based on the name column value and referenced using normal notation of the dollar and curly brackets. Then we use the equal sign. And to note the answer that we selected, we have to utilize the name column value. You don't want to use the label. The XLS form will only recognize the name column value. So in this case, because the yes is lowercase, we have to reference it using the lowercase version. We put it between apostrophes because it is a string value. If you're using a numeric value in this case, there's no need for the apostrophes as it is not a string value. Another type of multiple choice is the select multiple, where you can select more than one choice option. So in this case, what services were provided to the child? In this case, we have multiple services: health, nutrition, education, protection, and other. And what we want to understand is we want to understand what other services are being provided to that child. So in this case, because it's a select multiple, that means we can have multiple choices. Whereas if we go back to this one, the select one only allows you to select one choice option. So it's easy to reference it using the equal sign. However, when you have more than one choice option selected, we need to reference the specific choice that would relate to this question and cause that question to appear. So in this case, from the multiple choice options, this question should only appear when other is selected. So because, again, it's a select multiple, we have to use a new notation. So in this case, we put selected, and then we note the question that we're referencing. We put a comma and we reference the specific field that we have. In this case, it should be, we're referencing the other. The only thing is you should have an uppercase other. So we'll change that before we send that out. So it needs to match 1-to-1 with your name column value. So again, how you reference a select one and a select multiple is different. So a select one, you can reference either way using the equal sign or the selected. The select multiple, you can only reference using the selected. This will be this is an example of skip logic using the and. So we're creating a more complex condition utilizing an and. So in this case, we have 3 questions. We're asking the respondent, are they employed? If they are employed, we ask them in what sector. And then based on the selector that is from the sectors that are available, health, agriculture, technology, and other, if they select the other sector, we want to know specifically what sector that is. So in the first question, you have that normal skip logic utilizing the select one, where you can only select one choice option. And then we utilize that initial relevant statement, and we add if you select other for the sector and combine them with an and. So basically, this specify other sector will appear only if we selected yes to are you employed, and for sector, which sector, and we selected other, will the specify other sector appear. So both of these statements have to be true for the question to appear, not just one of them. Then we have an example of a more complex skip logic statement using or. So in our first question here, we have what is your occupation and what is your monthly income? So in order for your monthly income to appear, you either need to be a full-time employee, part-time employee, or self-employed. We're making the assumption as a student or being unemployed, you don't have a monthly income. So in this case, this question, what is your monthly income, will appear only if you selected full-time student, which relates to 1 from our name column value, or 2, which references our part-time employee name column value, and self-employed, which is referenced using 3. So in this case, any one of these statements can be true for this to appear. Not all of them have to be met for this question to appear. Another great way to ensure better quality, data quality, is using constraints. So constraints allow you to validate and evaluate responses given to a question. They usually relate to the current question that you are using. And another great tool to use is the constraint message column. And the reason why I always recommend that our clients utilize this is the default questions provided by the system are not the most descriptive. Also, if you're maybe doing it in a different language, the default language for most XLS forms is usually English, though it can be based depending on how your browser is set, if you're using Enketo or ODK. But mostly it's for the customization of the messages. So in this example here, you see both the constraint and the constraint message here. So one thing to note is with constraints, you'll see a lot more of this period. The period references the answer provided for the current question. So essentially what we're saying is the current answer or response has to be greater than or equal to 0. If not, the number of the constraint message will appear, and that's the number of household members cannot be less than 0. So you just need to make sure then that what you're entering is either 0 or above. Some very useful constraint expressions are those that restrict the number of answers for multiple choice. So say, for example, you're asking someone what are their top 3, what is their favorite, where you're basically wanting to limit the number of choice options they can make from a multiple choice question where they might be able to choose more than one. So in this case, the question we're asking is, what are the 3 activities you do most days of the week? And from our choices sheet, we have get water, wash laundry, work in the field, go to the market, go to school, and other. So in this case, because it's a select multiple, in theory, I could select all of them. But from the question that we've asked, we really only want to know the top 3. So a great constraint to use for this is the count selected. So for count selected, we are essentially limiting how many choice options can be selected. So here we reference the function. Oops, sorry guys. We reference the current question with the period, and then we mention, less than or equal to 3. And then we have a nice constraint message to go with this, select up to 3 different options. This is very useful. Another useful constraint expression is using not. So we cannot select certain answers together using the not statement. So for this one, we are probably talking with a mother or maybe a younger woman or women in general. We ask them what services were provided during your health visit. And the choice options that are provided are regular checkup, antenatal care, postnatal care, OBGYN, tests, and others. So in this case, usually you aren't receiving both antenatal care and postnatal care, but both of these are services that a woman might utilize during her lifetime. So it's good to have both options. But for the validity and the quality of the data, we don't want someone to be able to select both. They should be able to select one or the other, but not both. And you should still be able to select other options. The ways to limit this is using the not statement. So essentially what the not says is whatever statement is within its brackets cannot be what is selected. So the actual statement that we're looking at here, that we looked at is selected for the current question A and C, and selected for the current question P and C. And we've connected them with an and, which means I would need both of these to be true in order to flag this message. So essentially, what I'm saying is the constraint will cause this constraint message when I select A and C and P and C. So the not is essentially saying, you cannot select, basically what's between your brackets is a statement that cannot occur. So in this case, we can't select A and C and P and C. I will say sometimes you need to play around a little bit with this function. Sometimes it doesn't always work exactly as you might anticipate. So I always encourage you to test out your constraints before you go into the field. It's also great when you're utilizing it's also a great function for the relevant condition as well. Maybe you didn't select certain answers, and by utilizing the not function, you can reduce the amount of conditional statements you need to have linked using the logical statements or and. So in this case, what is your occupation? So we'll go back to that previous example. There's 2 different ways you can write that relevant condition. Here we're using the not, and if we go back a few slides, you'll see we had 3 different statements connected by or. So in this case, it's a lot easier because we only have to write 2 instead of 3. This isn't a huge difference, but when you start talking about maybe 5 statements versus 10, that's a huge difference. So in this case, our relevant condition is saying, I have not selected either student or employed for this condition to appear. So essentially, whatever is between your brackets for the not is the condition that cannot occur. There's also regular statements, which are noted with a regex function. Regex function in ODK collect. In ODK. And there's, I would say, 3 main regex constraints that are utilized quite a bit, or I recommend being utilized, because it helps to ensure, again, better data quality. The first one is where you might want to restrict the data captured to just alpha letters, either uppercase or lowercase in spaces. This allows you only to enter a name. Alternatively, you don't necessarily need this. Some clients choose to restrict only to letters and spaces when entering a respondent's name. It ensures that you don't get alphanumeric characters. So in this case, all we did is we're referencing the current question. And then what's between the apostrophes here is the actual statement. So the statement begins after the power and ends right before the $sign. Both of these are noting the beginning and the end. So this symbol here notes the beginning of the expression, and the $sign notes the ending of the expression. So in this case, what we put between our square brackets is the type of characters you might expect in the expression that you're entering in the question answer itself. So in this case, we can enter letters A to Z in both lowercase and uppercase. You also would probably want to include spaces, such as for names, maybe for John Smith, you would want a space between John and Smith. That's why we included this space. The information between the curly brackets is how many digits or characters you're expecting. So in this case, we're expecting between 5 and 20 characters for the respondent's name, including the spaces. You can change this. This is just an example. And again, I always, especially with these, I recommend including constraint messages. Otherwise, it can get very frustrating for the respondent if they're not aware that you included a constraint in this case, and you're expecting something very specific, especially for numbers. So in our next example, a very common means to use the regular statements are actually for telephone numbers. So as explained before, we have the beginning of our statement and the end. So when you include information before your square brackets, this is information that you would expect in all of your answers. So in this case, I'm expecting an answer that begins with 254, includes digits from 0 to 9, and I'm expecting 9 additional digits after 254. So in our constraint message, you can kind of see it explains it a little bit better. We're expecting you to enter a phone number starting with the 254 country code followed by 9 digits. But you can change this up and include different options. Maybe in your country you have landlines and mobile numbers, and each of them has a different number of values. You can actually include that and include that variability. So say maybe you have for your mobile numbers, you expect 9 numbers, but for your landline, you only expect 7. What I would recommend is putting a 7, 9, and what that'll mean is now we're expecting a number starting with 254 with digits 0 to 9 that has between 7 and 9 digits. The other thing you can do with this is you can add an appearance column. So when you're entering this information when you're entering the information for this question in ODK Collect, it'll pull up just a number pad rather than your keyboard, which has both alphanumeric characters. And then for the last one is an email. This one is a little bit more complex looking. So in this case, this actually should not be there. That has an extra comma. Oh no, that's fine. So essentially what this means is prior to the @ symbol in your email, we're expecting anything from lowercase to uppercase, digits, periods, underscores, percentages, hashes, And you can enter as many as you want. The plus notates the ability to enter as many characters or digits as you want prior to the at symbol. After the at symbol, we're expecting again lower and uppercase letters, digits 0 to 9, a period, and just a hash. We no longer are allowing underscores or percentages. Then we add a plus to move to the next expression. Here we add a backslash because we have a period. As everyone knows, you have kind of your gmail.com, msn.com, Yahoo, etc. So we just need to add a backslash before our period and then noting what we're expecting. So after our dot in an email address, we're just expecting lower or uppercase letters, and we're expecting anywhere from 2 to 4 characters. And that kind of defines what our email address expression would look like. These, I would say, are the most utilized expressions that we use for regular statements as constraints for a lot of the forms we develop. So I'm going to actually exit full screen. And what I'd like to do here is just kind of talk about the example form that we put together. So this is a form that I put together ahead of time. It's a normal health visit. We actually have what it looks like. So this is the digitized version of this. So it looks like your basic entry form into like a doctor's office. So say you go to a doctor's office and you're a new client there, you might have to fill in a health visit form. This is what this is meant to mimic. And it allows us to test out and try out a lot of the different constraints that we talked about today. So in the form, we're collecting your name. You could add a regular statement here, but like I said, I don't always do that for the name column value. Sorry, for names. Because the thing about regular statements is you don't want to use them too much, but you want to make sure you utilize them strategically so that they don't constrain how you're collecting the data. It's better to minimize the number of regular statements if possible. So one of the examples we used is entering a national ID. So in this case, we're saying the national ID number is 8 digits. So this is a very simple regular statement. It's just digits 0 to 9, and then there's just 8. We're just expecting 8. And then here we're doing a mobile number. So we're collecting, again, digits, and we're just expecting 10 digits. Great. Then we have integers for height and weight. Let me go further down. So this is an interesting combination as well. So in questions where we ask, for example, here we ask, do you have any of the following illnesses? So if we go to that question here, you can see we have a list of different illnesses that might affect you. So if I select maybe diabetes, thyroid, and maybe migraines, and then I go and select other will appear. But that now if I select none, I really shouldn't be able to select any of these other illnesses. It doesn't make sense from a data collection perspective. So you want to make sure you have kind of a constraint to limit that. So what we did in the form is we utilized 2 of the functions that we talked about today. We utilized the count selected and the not function. So in this case, in our not function, we want to put the statement that we don't want to be true. So in this case, that would be, we don't want someone to select none and other options. So the selected is pretty straightforward. We reference the current field and we reference the name column value for none, which in this case, if we go, is just none. Then we add the conditional operator using and we link it to the count selected. So what this statement is saying is the count selected for the current question, when it is greater than or equal to 1, and not is selected cannot occur comprehensively. So essentially, we're just saying you cannot select none and any other option. We utilize this one quite a bit, and it's quite easy to use, especially if you're consistent in how you're naming your nones, because as you can see, it's just referencing the current field. So you don't ever have to change the question you're referencing, as you might need to do with a skip logic here. Then we have some very simple skip logic here. So in this question, the same question we were previously talking about, because it's a select multiple, we're applying that selected, referencing the field and referencing the specific choice option that we want to make this question appear. Another interesting option where we provide is where we do kind of a compound complex conditional expression here. So in the form, a lot of forms when you go to the doctor will ask, are you pregnant or nursing? But obviously this only applies to females and females of reproductive age. So in this case, we defined females of reproductive age, those that are greater than or equal to 8. This can increase, this can, I would probably say typically that's around 10. Some we'll just be on the safe side and say 8. So in this one, we're saying you need to have selected female in the gender question. And from the date of birth, we also calculated the age. So based on the age that was calculated, that age must be greater than or equal to 8 in order for this question to appear. So now if we go and actually look at the form, I'm just going to enter, and you can kind of see how this will work. So we don't have an issue, but if we enter 9, we get an issue with the national ID. You can also enter constraints as well for dates. That is also a common one. This one I didn't. Then we have our mobile number. So we'll say, I think that's 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah. So if we add one additional digit, we'll get that error message and we'll remove, and then it should disappear. Another thing that we typically recommend, let's just say, here we'll just put numbers. Generally, when you have integers, we always recommend including the constraint. I didn't include it here, but we do typically recommend this, where you include greater than 0 or greater than or equal to 0 for most of your integer values, unless you're expecting negative values. Otherwise, it leaves it open that you might have negative answers in your data. So this helps to reduce the amount of data cleaning. Great. And we'll continue. So if I select male, you'll see that around these questions, the pregnancy and nursing question does not occur. We also want to change our date of birth. So let's go ahead and change that to maybe like 2005, and we'll say July. Great. So that's around what, 7, so that's 12 plus 3 plus 5, so like 17. So it should appear, the nursing and pregnant should not appear because we had selected male, but now if we select female, it should appear. Yeah, as you can see. So that skip logic worked great. We already talked about the none, so we'll continue. Specify other illness, we'll say maybe we'll select other, and then you can put your medications, and then we ask about the family history, and again we have that none option, and the option should appear when we move on, but we'll just fill in others. And then just some simple choice options. And again, we have that none option. And that should be. So another cool thing about this form is we also have a special one where we have a choice filter that allows you to see the choice option selected here in the next question so that we can select our top 3 symptoms. So we'll select a few. We'll say like, I don't know, that's a good number. Now, when I select more than 3, I'll get kind of that error message. Yeah, so that's kind of form validation in a nutshell. We'll be sharing resources. We'll give you guys access to the form we developed here. So hopefully you guys can apply some of the things you learned in your own forms as well. We've also given links to the regular function. There's additional information on the ODK documents. There's also, we also have a common form here, gives you a couple of different ways that we utilize this. So we have name, age, phone number, and email. This is the example I showed you guys. So if you want to test it out, you can take a look at that. And then we also have other common regular functions. You have to play around with these a bit, but they give you specific examples. This is really, really helpful. And usually you can kind of make minor updates to it to make it fit your needs. And then again, we have links to the actual project, which is here, and you can just kind of try them and see how they work for you. I think with that, we'll move on to questions. Oops, wrong one. Are there any questions? Okay, it doesn't seem that there are any questions. Then, oh, maybe there's a question. Feel free to raise your hand, okay, if you guys have any questions. Okay, well, we want to thank you guys for your time. Thank you for joining us today. Unless anyone has any additional questions, I think we'll be wrapping up our webinar. We'll be reaching out with a follow-up email and links to the resources that were shared in today's webinar, and we'll be also sharing a recording should you decide you want to reference it later. Thanks again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar in the next year.